They thought it'd be easy. 6 men with rifles, smirks, and no soul come to strip the last ounce of dignity from a paralyzed bride and a disgraced cowboy. But Delilah Vane didn't flinch. She rolled forward, steady hands on the pistol in her lap, and fired. The bullet hit dirt, right between their leader's boots. And just like that, the sneers vanished. "I missed by choice," she said. "Try me again." They'd come expecting weakness. What they found was fury. What they tried to steal had already been forged in fire. This wasn't pity. This was defiance. And what rose from that prairie dust was the kind of love no bullet could kill. This is the story of Delilah and Calder. And it begins with a warning shot. The door of Murphy's saloon slammed shut behind him as Calder Boone staggered out into the choking heat of a Nebraska summer, his breath ragged, knuckles dripping blood onto the cracked boards of the porch. His fist still throbbed from where it connected with Miles Rusk's jaw, but the pain meant little. Inside, no one had cheered. No one had said his name like it mattered. They'd all seen it. Gideon Sharp's accusation hanging in the air, heavier than smoke. "You ran, Calder. You let Jimmy die while you hid like a scared little child." He had, and no punch could change that. The street was empty, save for the drifting dust and a dog scratching under the livery post. Calder didn't bother with his hat. It lay somewhere on the saloon floor, forgotten like the last bit of dignity he hadn't managed to lose. Clearwater had once been his town. He'd built fences for half these ranchers, fixed their gates, fought beside them during lean winters. But ever since the Apache raid in May, the one where Jimmy Talcott took 3 arrows to the chest while Calder crouched behind a boulder, every handshake had gone cold. Every voice dropped to a whisper when he walked by. He didn't fight it. How could he? By the time he reached his cabin, sweat clung to his shirt like a second skin. Dusty, his mare, nickered low and trotted up from the shade near the barn. He pressed his forehead to her neck and muttered, "Ain't much left of me, girl." Inside, the cabin creaked with loneliness. The coffee was stale. The woodpile was down to its last few splits. He sat on the porch with a cup that tasted more like dirt than beans, watching the sun slide west. No one was coming, and if they were, it wouldn't be for him. That's why the riders were a surprise. 3 of them, cutting across the prairie like shadows on horseback. Calder's jaw clenched the moment he saw Gideon Sharp leading the way, flanked by Miles Rusk and Elias Crow. Men he'd once ridden with, laughed with, bled beside. Now they looked like wolves sniffing out something wounded. "Boone," Gideon called as they dismounted, grins stretched across his sunburnt face. "Heard you been keeping to yourself out here." Calder didn't move. "What do you want?" "Just paying a neighborly visit," Miles smirked. "We heard you might be in need of companionship." Calder's gut turned. "There's a girl," Gideon said casually. "Delilah Vane, pretty once. Wagon accident left her legs useless. Her kin don't know what to do with her. They're offering $50 and a gold watch to any man fool enough to take her in as a wife." He paused, then tipped his hat back. "We thought of you." A sick silence fell. "Two broken folks making do," Gideon continued, eyes gleaming. "You've got no one. She can't run. Seemed like a match made in heaven." Calder stared, not blinking, not moving. "They already sent her," Elias added, voice flat. "Wagon rolls in tomorrow. You're the groom, Boone." The men mounted again, laughing as they rode off, their silhouettes swallowed by the setting sun. Calder sat frozen, hands clenched, the bitter coffee cooling untouched beside him. He didn't chase after them, didn't shout. He simply stared at the horizon, at the dust they left behind. Because somewhere deep down, he believed them. The world had made up its mind, and Calder Boone didn't argue with verdicts anymore. The wagon creaked to a halt just after dawn. The wheels groaned like the burden they carried. Wood, iron, and a woman no one seemed to want anymore. Calder Boone stood on the porch of his cabin, arms folded, eyes narrow. A lean, sharp-faced man with graying stubble stepped down from the front seat and didn't bother with a greeting. "You Boone?" he asked, already annoyed. Calder nodded once. "I'm Royce Vane. Brought you your bride." He said it like he was delivering livestock, not a human being. Royce didn't wait for permission. He moved to the back of the wagon, threw off the canvas, and gestured inside. You'll want to get her out. She can't do it herself. Inside, laying stiff on a thin mattress, was Delilah Vane. Her red hair was wild, knotted from wind and neglect. Her skin was pale, but not fragile, more like porcelain that refused to crack. Her green eyes met Calder's squarely, and in them he didn't see fear, not even resentment, just a kind of steady defiance, like a woman who had already lost everything and refused to lose what remained. "You must be Calder Boone," she said, voice quiet but precise. "I am. They told you I can't walk." "They did." She didn't blink. "And you still said yes?" Calder hesitated. "Didn't have much choice, ma'am." "Neither did I," she said flatly. The words dropped between them like iron. Royce crossed his arms, clearly impatient. "Well, since we're all so thrilled, let's get her unloaded." Calder stepped forward. "I'll carry her." "I don't need—" Delilah began, but her arms trembled as she tried to push herself up. Calder didn't wait for approval. He lifted her gently, surprised at how light she was. She didn't fight it, only looked away. The cabin was quiet, small, built for one man in his silence. Now it felt tight, like walls too close to breathe. He laid her on the cot near the window. Royce dropped off a wooden wheelchair, sturdy, clearly expensive, and muttered, "Courtesy of her aunt. Lord knows we ain't monsters." Delilah didn't thank him. Royce didn't expect it. He tipped his hat toward no one and left without a backward glance. When the dust from the wagon faded, silence took its place. Calder cleared his throat. "There's coffee." Delilah nodded, rolling herself to the stove. She tried to reach the tin on the shelf but knocked it sideways. Beans spilled across the counter. She cursed softly and kept going. She burned herself trying to lift the kettle. When Calder moved to help, she snapped, "I can do it." He backed off. "All right." She got the coffee made, but spilled half pouring it, sat at the table, didn't drink it. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, everything sat still. Flashback, 5 months earlier. Delilah behind a counter in Omaha, sleeves rolled, calculating shipments. Her father's general store bustled. She spoke to suppliers with authority, knew where every dollar was, managed the books, balanced the weight of responsibility and legacy. Then the wagon overturned, and the family store became her cousin's. She became someone else's burden. Calder didn't speak much that week, but he saw what needed changing. He lowered the kitchen counter, built a ramp to the porch, widened the bathroom door. He didn't ask. He just did. Delilah watched, quietly, suspicious at first. But as the sun slipped through the window that third evening, and she wheeled easily into the kitchen without catching a wheel on anything, she realized something strange. She wasn't being pitied. She was being considered. And that felt almost like being seen. The storm rolled in thick and sudden, swallowing the prairie in a velvet black. Thunder cracked like a rifle overhead, and the wind clawed at the shutters of the cabin with restless fingers. Calder Boone sat at the table, oil lamp flickering beside a stack of old fence receipts. Delilah Vane sat by the window, her lap covered in mending. Neither of them spoke much that evening. The air was too tense, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Then came the knock. 3 sharp bangs, too forceful to be neighborly, too precise to be lost travelers. Calder froze. Delilah's hand stopped mid-stitch. A low growl of voices murmured outside. Calder stood slowly and moved to the window. Rain smeared the glass, but he could just make out the figures. 3, maybe 4 men, coats soaked, hats pulled low, their shapes blurring in the stormlight. He stepped back, voice low. "Stay behind me." Delilah wheeled back once, then stopped. "No." "Delilah, I'm not hiding." She rolled toward the bed, reached beneath the mattress, and pulled out her father's Colt revolver, a 6-shooter worn with age but loaded with memory. She rested it across her lap, hands steady. Calder gave one short nod, then stepped to the door. His fingers slid beneath the table, wrapping around the cold steel of his rifle. A moment of silence passed. Then the door shattered inward, kicked open with the weight of wet boots and worse intentions. The man who entered first was tall, soaked to the bone, a pistol already drawn and aimed toward Calder. 2 others spilled in behind him, mouths twisted in sneers. "Evening, Boone," the first one said, voice like gravel and rot. Heard you turned soft, hiding out with a cripple for company. Behind Calder, Delilah's hand twitched on the Colt. She said nothing, but her gaze locked on the speaker. Don't make this hard, one of the others muttered. We just want what's owed. You ain't owed nothing, Calder said, leveling the rifle with both hands. Turn around. You got one chance. The first man snorted. You gonna shoot me, coward? Calder did. The shot rang through the cabin like lightning. It hit low, not fatal, but enough to drop the man to his knees with a scream. That was when the second man lunged. Delilah fired. Her bullet struck true, square in the side of the second attacker. He staggered, fell against the wall, bleeding and breathless. The third man hesitated, eyes darting between Calder's rifle and Delilah's unwavering aim. Rain spilled through the broken door behind him, wind howling louder now, as if even nature had joined the fight. Go, Calder growled. The man ran. The cabin fell still again, save for the storm outside. Calder lowered his rifle slowly. Delilah exhaled, her hands still tight around the Colt. The two wounded men groaned, one clutching his side, the other writhing on the floor. Calder stepped forward and then paused. He looked at Delilah, truly looked. She hadn't flinched, she hadn't cried, she had defended them. Their home, not his, theirs. He walked over, knelt beside her chair, and placed a hand over her trembling fingers. You good? He asked. Delilah nodded, a flicker of fire still in her eyes. You? Calder gave a small smile. Better now. Outside, thunder rolled on, but inside the cabin something had shifted, not just the air or the silence, but the weight of who they were. They had fought not beside each other, but together, and neither one had run. Delilah noticed it first in the scraps, stray leather cuttings on the cabin floor, a sliver of brass hidden in Calder's pocket, the way he stayed up after supper, hammering in the barn long after the lamp should have gone cold. He said little, he always did, but there was a look in his eyes lately, like he was chasing something just beyond the horizon. One night she caught him sneaking in past midnight, sawdust on his shirt, a quiet satisfaction tugging at his mouth. What are you building? She asked from the cot. He glanced at her but didn't answer, just gave that maddening half-smile and said, You'll see. And she did. It was nearly a week later. The moon hung full and golden over the prairie, washing everything in silver. Calder wheeled her out to the barn in silence, his hand warm on her shoulder. Calder, she whispered, uncertain. What are we doing? He didn't reply. Inside, the barn smelled of cedar shavings and oil. The horses shifted in their stalls, hooves tapping gently. In the center of the room, suspended from a thick rafter beam, was something that looked like a tangle of straps, iron rings, and padded leather. Delilah's brow furrowed. What is that? Calder stepped forward, adjusted a pulley, and the rig swayed gently like a cradle. It's for you, he said softly, so you can ride. Her breath caught. She stared at it, unmoving. You built this? He nodded. It ain't perfect, but it's strong. I tested it myself. Her throat tightened. Calder, I haven't ridden since before the accident. I haven't been that high off the ground in 2 years. He stepped toward her, knelt beside the chair. I know, he said, but the sky's still yours, Delilah. You just forgot. He lifted her gently, wrapping the harness around her waist, under her arms, behind her legs with practiced hands. He moved carefully without pity, only steadiness. Delilah's heart thundered as the rig creaked and pulled her upward, rising like a whisper above her chair. Her arms trembled. Her voice shook. I'm scared. I've got you, Calder said, voice steady. I always will. He guided her over to Dusty, the old mare waiting patiently beneath the open barn roof. With the ease of someone who had rehearsed every motion, Calder lowered her onto the saddle and unhooked the straps. She sat still for a moment, frozen. Then her hands found the reins. The leather felt familiar. The scent of horse sweat and saddle oil filled her lungs like a lost memory. Her legs dangled uselessly, but her spine straightened, her chin lifted. The world looked different from here. Wider, wilder, possible. Calder mounted up behind her, his arms settling around her waist, a wool blanket draped gently over both their shoulders. As Dusty stepped forward, the barn doors creaked open, and the prairie spilled out before them in silver waves. "The world took your legs, Delilah," Calder whispered against her ear. "But it didn't take the sky." She laughed, a sound full of awe and pain and gratitude. And as they rode into the night, she felt something loosen in her chest, something she hadn't dared feel since the day the wheels shattered her spine. Freedom. Not the kind that comes from running, but the kind you reclaim, inch by stubborn inch. The sign above the storefront still smelled of fresh cedar. Boone and Vane, goods for the free by the free. Calder had carved it himself, hands steady for the first time in years. The shelves weren't full, but they were enough. Sacks of flour, bolts of cloth, nails, soap. Delilah handled the ledgers with quiet precision, humming as she worked behind the counter. Life was beginning to feel possible again. Then came the sound of hooves. 6 riders thundered down the dusty road like a storm front with bad intentions. Calder stepped onto the porch, rifle slung low, heart already sinking. At the head of the group sat Gideon Sharp, back straight, grin mean. "Morning, Boone," he said, dismounting with theatrical calm. "Heard you're playing shopkeeper now." "What do you want, Gideon?" Calder asked flatly. "Territory tax," Gideon said, spreading his arms, "for doing business on public drive. Sheriff's too far to help you now, but we're here, providing protection." "You mean robbery," Calder replied. Gideon chuckled. "Call it what you like. Either you pay us, or we take what's fair." Behind him, one of the strangers reached for his holster. Then a sound cracked through the morning. Bang! Dirt exploded between Gideon's boots. He jumped back, cursing. All eyes snapped toward the porch, where Delilah Vane sat in her wheelchair, Colt revolver resting in her lap, smoke curling from the barrel. "I missed by choice," she said, voice calm as stone. "Try me again." Silence choked the air. Calder stepped beside her, rifle raised. "You heard the lady." The tension shattered all at once. One of the outlaws fired first. Calder dropped to a knee and returned fire, grazing the man's shoulder. Another rushed the porch. Delilah fired again, forcing him back with a shout. Bullets tore through the window. Glass rained down across flour sacks and canned goods. A sharp sting ripped across Delilah's cheek. Blood welled, but she didn't stop. She braced her wrist on the porch railing and fired 2 more shots, forcing the riders to scatter. Calder roared, swinging his rifle like a club into a man charging up the steps. The 2 of them fell to the dirt in a tangle of fists and fury. Delilah turned, covering Calder's flank as another attacker tried to circle from behind. Her shot cracked clean, knocking the pistol from his hand. The firefight lasted less than 2 minutes. The silence afterward rang louder than the gunshots. Bodies groaned in the dirt. 2 men scrambled back to their horses, dragging their wounded with them. Gideon staggered to his feet, hand trembling. "You're insane," he spat, staring at Delilah's bloody cheek and steady hands. "No," she replied. "We're just done being prey." Calder stepped beside her, rifle still hot in his grip. "Tell the rest," he said, voice like gravel. "This land's ours, and we'll bleed to keep it." Gideon didn't answer. He just turned, mounted his horse, and vanished into the dust with the others. As calm returned, Calder rushed to Delilah's side, gently touching her face. "You're hurt." "Just a scratch," she whispered, leaning into his hand. But her eyes were blazing. The envelope was thick, sealed with red wax, and bore a return address in Omaha. Delilah stared at it on the porch railing for a long while before opening it. The handwriting was familiar. Her cousin Sarah, always neat, always calculated. Calder was out back chopping firewood. The late sun cast long, golden fingers across the prairie. Inside was a proposition, a chance to come home, a chance to sell the store, walk away from the dust and the violence, from nights guarding the door with a pistol in her lap. Her cousin had secured an offer for the land and inventory. The buyer would clear Calder's name from the deed. The money would be hers, enough to buy back her father's old general store, enough to start over. All she had to do was leave. That night she didn't sleep. The oil lamp burned low beside her as the letter lay open on the table. She read it again and again, as if the words would change. Across the room, Calder stirred in his sleep, his brow creased in dreams. One hand curled instinctively toward the space beside him, the space where Delilah used to lay before she insisted on her own cot again. For space, she said. But truthfully, she needed room to think. She wheeled quietly onto the porch. The stars stretched endlessly above. The next morning, Calder returned from the post office, dusty and tired. She met him at the steps with the letter folded in her hands. He took one look and stiffened. She wants me to come home, Delilah said plainly. He didn't respond. She says I can sell the store, that she found a buyer. I'd have a real future again, a stable one, maybe even a respectable one. Calder leaned against the post, his jaw working like he wanted to say something, but didn't know how. Delilah's voice dropped. Do you think we're only together because we had no choice? Because I'm broken? Because you're ruined in this town? Calder looked away. I don't know what I'd feel in another life, he admitted quietly. If none of this had happened, if we weren't ruined, she finished for him. He sighed. But I know this life, and in this one, I don't want to lose you. Flashback insert. Delilah remembered Clara Fenn, a widow who once lived on the ridge near Clearwater. Clara had fallen in love with a ranch hand, kind, strong, poor, but her family convinced her to marry a banker in Lincoln. She never smiled after that. Delilah used to catch her staring out her window at the dirt path that led nowhere. Clara died quietly, rich, alone. That evening, Calder came in from the barn, hands still stained with iron dust. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. Not a box, just something simple, honest. He knelt beside her, not on one knee like a stage play, but low, like a man offering something from deep inside himself. Inside the pouch was a silver ring, hand-forged, a tiny hawk in flight carved along the edge, a wildflower blooming beside it. You're not my last chance, he said. You're the reason I believe again. Delilah didn't cry. She didn't have to. She just reached out, took his calloused hand, and whispered, yes. The prairie didn't need stained glass or steeples. It had the sky, wide and open. It had the wind, honest and constant. And it had two souls who had clawed their way back from being forgotten. The guest stood as Delilah wheeled forward under the arbor, her wheels moving gently through the prairie grass. She wore a blue dress, faded but dignified, stitched by her mother years ago. A small sprig of wildflower was pinned to her shoulder. She didn't need a veil. The way Calder looked at her, like the sky itself had stopped to watch, was enough. Calder wore his vest, the one with the patched shoulder, and a shirt scrubbed so clean it nearly looked white. He stood tall, though his hands trembled as he reached for her. There were no crowds, just a handful of townsfolk, neighbors who once muttered behind hands now standing quietly, watching something they didn't fully understand, but couldn't look away from either. The preacher, a retired circuit rider with a sunburned face and trembling voice, spoke with simplicity. They came here with nothing, not even each other, but what they built, no storm, no bullet, no whisper could take from them. When it came time for vows, Calder didn't look at the preacher. He looked only at Delilah. I once thought I had nothing left, he said, but then you rolled into my life like thunder on dry ground. You're not what saved me, Delilah. You're what reminded me I was still worth saving. Her voice didn't waver. They call me too broken to be wanted, but you never tried to fix me. You just made room for me. You gave me ground to root again, and I'll spend every day returning that gift. There was no grand kiss, just a gentle one, quiet and true, the kind that speaks of having bled beside each other and choosing to stay. 1 week later, the shop they built together stood like a promise. Boone and Vane, it wasn't just a store, it was a statement. They didn't have much of stock at first, but what they had was clean, well counted, and fairly priced. Flour, beans, salt, rope, needles, boots repaired by Calder's careful hands. Delilah kept the books so clean, not even the banker in town could find fault. At first, people came with suspicion. They peeked in, hats in hand, eyes cautious. But they left with more than supplies. They left with stories, and stories are what the West remembers. That woman stopped a raid from a chair. That man used to be a coward. Now he'd die before letting you go hungry. They were a joke once. Now they're the ones you trust when things go bad. The whispers faded. The nods began. Then came respect. Not loud, not quick, but steady as prairie wind. One evening, Calder found Delilah on the porch, the ledger open on her lap, the wind gently tugging at the corners. "I was thinking," she said, not looking up, "if we ever have a child, we should teach them both how to shoot and how to listen." Calder smiled. "That's the best law I've heard yet." He knelt beside her and placed something on the porch rail. A small carved figurine, a hawk with wings spread, carrying a sprig of wildflower. "You made that?" she asked. He nodded. "For the day we stopped running." Delilah reached for his hand, and as the sky turned amber and the last rays spilled across the boards of their store, they sat together. Not perfect, not unscarred, but undefeated. The West didn't tame them, it taught them, and they rewrote it, with love, with grit, and with fire that never asked permission to burn. In the end, Calder and Delilah didn't just rewrite their fate, they rewrote what it means to be whole. Their story reminds us that love doesn't require perfection, only courage. That sometimes what the world throws away becomes the cornerstone of something unshakable. In today's world, especially for those of us who've seen a few more winters, it's easy to feel like we've been passed over. Maybe we've lost a partner, been called too old, too broken, too late to matter. But Calder and Delilah show us it's never too late to build something real. Not out of what we've lost, but out of who we choose to become. Maybe you've had your own boon in vain moment, where you stood your ground or let someone in when no one else would. We want to hear your story. Did this tale remind you of someone? Of something you've lived through? Or maybe you have a different take. Should Delilah have returned to Omaha? Leave a comment below. Your words might just be what someone else needs to hear today. And if you believe in stories like this, of resilience, redemption, and quiet love that refuses to quit, go ahead and tap that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next tale from the Wild West. And as the sun dipped below the horizon and the wind carried the last light across the porch, they sat together, no longer running. They had started planting, and the prairie would remember. Thank you for riding with us today. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and remember, even the dustiest trail can lead home.